Hi, everyone. This is your host, Lisa, from the World Vapers Alliance. And after a short break, I'm back again with another episode of Vaping Unplugged. I'm really excited to be back and to dive into some important developments in North America. Today, I'm joined by Elizabeth Hayes, Head of External Affairs at the Consumer Choice Center, and Sabine Benoit, Canadian Policy Associate at the Consumer Choice Center. How are we feeling, ladies?
Oh, we're feeling great and excited to be here. So, hello to all you Vaping Unplugged listeners.
Hi, everybody. I'm so excited. It's my first time on the show, and I'm really looking forward to talking to you.
Thank you both so much for joining. Liz, it's great to have you back. We had an episode with you earlier, and Sabine, as you mentioned, it's your first time, so very warm welcome. Before we jump into the policy and just discussing a little bit what's going on in your part of the world, maybe you guys could tell us a little bit about yourself. And since it's the first time for Sabine, maybe we can start with Sabine. Could you please introduce yourself? What's your focus at CC, especially when it comes to tobacco harm reduction?
As you said, I'm the Canadian Policy Associate, so I'm really focused on, tobacco policy in Canada across the whole country. We're a big country, and every province is different. They're all special snowflakes when it comes to how they want to regulate things. It's all equally annoying to me. So I'm really happy to be able to go through every province and point out what's wrong with what they're doing, and federally as well, as we'll talk about pouches today. You'll hear a little bit from me on how annoying that is federally. So it's a provincial and a federal issue. So there's a lot for us to do here in Canada. Some people look at the United States as the pinnacle of tobacco harm reduction ridiculousness, but we're pretty close behind. We have our own ridiculous policies, and I'm constantly trying to stay on top of the new and more horrible ones. But as you'll see today, we'll talk about it later, there are some flickers of hope, and I try to stay on top of that as well. So I write, I talk about it, I take every opportunity to talk about it because I know how effective it is for smokers. I have smokers in my own family, and it's really important that they have those alternatives. So it's personal to me, and it's also sort of intellectual.
Thank you so much for the intro and for the work that you're doing. Liz, maybe for those who didn't catch our previous episode, you could also do a quick introduction, especially about your work on nicotine policy in the US.
Yes, absolutely. So I'm Liz Hayes. I'm the head of external affairs with the Consumer Choice Center. I handle a lot of our work in tobacco harm reduction here throughout the United States at both local, state, and then federal level as well. So I like to say never a dull moment here. We see a lot of legislation pop through, whether it be tax increases, flavor bans, nicotine-free generation attempts, all sorts of just bad policy. So I have the privilege of annoying a lot of our legislators and policymakers, in addition to writing, doing media, and all that fun stuff to really advocate for nicotine alternatives. And I will do a quick plug. We recently released the US Nicotine Pouch Accessibility Index, where we ranked every state by the accessibility for consumers to get these nicotine alternative pouch products. And it was interesting to see how the states all ranked. As of right now, I will say they ranked a lot better than I anticipated. But as we see more and more legislative threats pop up to these nicotine alternatives, I anticipate we'll see a lot more lower grades the next time we do this.
Yeah, I mean, we definitely want to talk a little bit about pouches right now because they remain still to be in a gray area all around the world, but now policymakers seem to have more time to restrict them. So let's just discuss that a little bit further in the interview. But right now, Liz, I'm going to start with you. As you mentioned, there's a lot of developments in the USA on the state level and the federal discussions. So from your perspective, maybe you could give us what is the most important vaping policy debate right now or development right now in the US. And before we hopped on the podcast, you also mentioned that you want to talk a little bit about Mexico. So maybe you could cover that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So in the US, we are just seeing a lot of threats to both vaping and nicotine pouches. Historically, over the last couple of years, I've been working in this space. There was a lot of threats to vaping in particular. We saw a lot of flavor bans, increased in taxes, bans on online sales, all sorts of just, again, really bad policies that are limiting consumers' access to this product, which we all know is 95% less harmful than smoking combustible tobacco. So if we're trying to protect public health, which of course our FDA, our Food and Drug Administration, which regulates these products, is supposed to do, these policies just don't add up or make a lot of sense. This last year and coming into 2026, we're seeing a lot more of legislative threats towards nicotine pouches in particular. It seems that folks, they're definitely still regulating vapes, to be clear. They're not letting that go yet. But it seems like pouches are this new thing that now everybody is worried about. And again, we know that vaping is 95% less harmful than smoking. It's anticipated that pouches, once we get some more studies done, that they'll be about 98, 99% less harmful than smoking combustible tobacco. So both vaping and nicotine pouches are fantastic nicotine alternatives for consumers who either currently smoke and are trying to move away, or for those that, are looking for a less harmful option as to how to consume nicotine. And just on Mexico really quick, we got wind, it was last month in January, that a constitutional amendment was passed through where they banned e-cigarettes and vapes in the interest of public health, right? Which, why would you ban the thing that's less harmful than combustible tobacco? There is no cigarette ban. It's just the e-cigarettes and vapes that are currently banned. And they put in some really interesting penalties, including up to $12,500 fines and up to 8 years in prison if you bring vapes into the country. It's fascinating because in Mexico, there's about over 63,000 who unfortunately pass away every year from smoking related illnesses, which accounts for about 10% of all deaths in Mexico. So why we would, or I shouldn't say we, because I had nothing to do with this, but why Mexico, why their government would decide to ban it and then penalize tourists who bring these devices in is beyond me. It's not protecting public health. It's absolutely exacerbating a problem they're trying to fix, in my opinion, which is reduce smoking rates and smoking related deaths and illnesses. And from the consumer perspective, as an American, Mexico is a popular travel destination for a lot of us. Probably won't be going there. If you can't bring vapes in, I'm going to get maybe 8 years in prison. Not worth it. But it's really going to kneecap their tourist industry and harm the country overall. So not a good idea, Mexico. Don't take a play out of any of these prohibitionist policy playbooks. You guys should definitely keep nicotine alternatives available for your population.
It's crazy how many countries not only prohibit or restrict less harmful alternatives, but it also somehow becomes the issue of individual rights because many consumers are criminalized. And we are working on cases in different countries like Thailand, for instance, where consumers have been facing charges because of maybe simply carrying a vape. It can go as crazy as that. So definitely important to speak up about that. Hopefully some consumers in Mexico will at least fight against that. Sabine, I'm just turning to Canada. There's a lot of fight going on in this direction as well in Canada. And I know that you guys have a flavor ban, and I just want to talk a little bit about that. I've recently stumbled upon the article, Reason Magazine, where they were talking about how flavor bans had unintended consequences and actually the smoking rates are going up. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about how the flavor ban is working in reality versus what policymakers intending to do with it. And you mentioned that you also want to talk about pouches. So it's important to see what's the general forecast when it comes to all less harmful nicotine products.
Yes, well, I mean, the landscape in Canada isn't generally negative when it comes to flavors, vaping in general, pouches. And I will say something about what Liz said about Mexico. There's a trend in Canada where Canadians are not vacationing in the United States as much as before, and they're transitioning that vacationing to places like Mexico that are close by, easy to get to, and a quick alternative to vacationing in the United States. And as that trend gets higher, I'm really worried about all those vapers that are going to Mexico from Canada because they're going to have a hard time doing that. So I just wanted to add that perspective from Canada on that. topic. So hopefully we'll be doing more work on that in the future because it's kind of crazy. And when it comes to Canada, we have something called the Tobacco and Vaping Products Act, and that tells you everything you need to know about how it's treated in Canada. It is equivalent to tobacco. Cigarettes and vapes are the same thing according to the government of Canada and the provinces. So that's how they're treated. But recently there was a report that came out that gave me a little bit of a glimmer of hope. Not too much of a glimmer of hope because I know nothing's probably going to happen because of it. But it is nice to see from the government of Canada coming out and saying that among Canadians who successfully quit smoking in 2024, 21% used an e-cigarette to help them stop. That's nearly as much as people that use traditional nicotine replacement therapies like the patches and the gums that you find at the store. And that's like 63,000 people who quit smoking with the help of vaping devices. That's the government of Canada owning up to this. Like, they can't avoid the facts anymore, even though they name things, the Tobacco and Vaping Products Act, and act like the same thing. They're the same thing. They're talking about it in this way, which makes me happy. The other part of that report that I found really interesting is that they estimated that Canada could reduce its smoking rate to 8.1% by 2035 initially. Now, with the introduction of legal vaping, the 2035 target is now 5.1%. Like, we could not have gotten to that point without this legal vaping market that is continuously treated like it's just as bad as smoking. And it's kind of ridiculous. When you look at pouches, we had the wonderful former health minister, Mark Holland, made the ridiculous decision to make sure that you have to go to a pharmacy to get pouches. And not all pharmacies. You have to go into a pharmacy and hope to God they are selling them, because it's not every pharmacy. So he put them behind the counter. You have to ask for it like you're asking for some sort of narcotic or something. Like, can I please have some pouches? So you have to talk to the pharmacist. You can't just do it. The problem with that is that cigarettes are still available in convenience stores and gas stations. So you can walk into a gas station and get a pack of cigarettes where you're inhaling a lot of toxins. It's really bad for your health. We know all that information, but you have to go to the pharmacist and ask for a pouch. And that's a federal restriction. So it's for all the provinces. And when it comes to flavors with vaping, every province has its own way of dealing with that. Most provinces ban all flavors except for tobacco flavor, which to me is kind of funny, because if you're trying to get people to not want to smoke tobacco, I don't know why the only flavor you're letting them smoke is tobacco. That reminds them of the sweet, sweet cigarettes they once smoked. But that's just me. Maybe that's a little too logical for the government of Canada, unfortunately. But the fact that this is out there, this report is out there, we can. I wrote an article for the Western Standard just pointing it out, and I will continue to point it out every time they tell me about this act that makes sure that everybody looks at vaping and cigarette smoking the same. It's not. It's helping smokers, and even the government of Canada is admitting it now. So I don't really know how they can continue on with this. They'll find a way, but we'll keep holding them to account.
Yeah, that's definitely a positive news to see that the health authority has to acknowledge how important vaping is for adult smokers to quit smoking. When you talked about the selling pouches in the pharmacies, also reminded me of how Australian government decided to only have vapes prescription based. And then basically consumers obviously found a loophole, because when they would hand out vapes to their family members or to other people, so it basically fuels the illicit actions or trade, this type of restrictions. But I don't know, the governments know about that, but the way they want to fight illicit trade then is through more prohibitionism, which doesn't make any sense. But let's hope that the situation will change. It's good to see that there are some positive updates. I'm going back to Liz, and I really want to talk a little bit more about the pouches, because I think this will be more a topic of discussion with policymakers, and for us it's definitely important, because we do have a focus on vaping, but also not only, right? All less harmful alternatives need to be available for consumers who want to quit smoking. And I know that there are some ongoing PMTA processes in the US, including applications for nicotine pouches. I know that some of them were approved, but I'm not sure whether we should see a real reason for optimism there. So do you think that could mean that FDA is gradually opening doors for pouches, or is still a questionable pathway, let's say it like that?
It's a fantastic question. We saw last year in January, the first pouches get approved through the PMTA process, which then the FDA authorized these pouches to be sold legally in the US. That was a huge win, I think, for all of us that advocate for harm reduction. It was Zyn who got the first authorizations in place. And not only was it for, your kind of menthol or tobacco flavored pouches, they covered all of their flavors. And that is the first time that the FDA has authorized any flavors in the US of any kind when it comes to nicotine alternatives. Still to this day, there are only tobacco and mint or menthol flavored vapes available that have been authorized. No flavors for vapes have been authorized yet. That doesn't mean that you can't find them. I mean, they are everywhere. Enforcement is very weak in the US, which I personally think is a good thing for consumers, because then you still have access to the kind of products you're looking for. And like Sabine said, if you're moving away from combustible cigarettes, I don't know if like a cigarette flavored vape is going to be attractive enough to then move you away. Adults like flavors too. I mean, I'm preaching to the choir here, but if we didn't like flavors, we would all only drink plain water. We like options, we like choices, and we like different flavors to enjoy. And so when it comes to pouches, we were really excited to see that Zyn got that authorization last year. And then late in December 2025, we saw also On Brands pouches. Those also got some authorizations. The caveat there is that they did not authorize any of the flavors. It was just the menthol and tobacco flavors, unfortunately, which is interesting because it's a part of what the FDA has started, which is a pilot program to ideally streamline more nicotine pouch authorizations for the United States. They have not really lived up to the hype, I would argue. There is a lot of PMTA applications in play. Back when they opened up this process, there was over 26 million applications submitted by a lot of different companies. For vapes, it was only about, I think, 39 products have been approved. And then now we have about a couple dozen different pouch products, again, from Zyn and from On. There haven't been any more yet, but there are a lot of different companies trying to break into this market legally. And again, you can still find a lot of different options, even in your, vape shops, gas stations. They're not fully restricted with the enforcement side, but from the legal side, they technically are illegal products if they're not authorized by the FDA. So there's a lot left to be desired. I think one hope, though, is that Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who's the head of HHS, FDA falls under that department. And he is a known nicotine pouch user. During his confirmation hearings to be the HHS secretary, we saw him pop in nicotine pouches right in front of Congress. So that gives me some hope. However, our politicians are known to be a bit hypocritical. So, what's good for him may not be good for everybody else. But it seems that the language is changing a little bit, where they are understanding that these nicotine alternatives do actually promote, benefits to public health in comparison to combustible smoking. So I'm cautiously optimistic that we will see some more authorizations come in. Again, this pilot program was supposed to streamline more pouch authorizations from the FDA. It has not done what it was intending to do. There's still hope and still time that it could really ramp up and start getting it together. But I am a little skeptical as well as to how far this will go. The other point I'll make as well is that during Donald Trump's campaign, he of course is now president again. One of the things he campaigned on was he was going to save flavored vapes. That hasn't happened at all. Again, it's interesting because on some enforcement's pretty weak, but we're also seeing some bigger task forces of different federal agencies like the DEA, which does, drug enforcement, the Postal Service, interestingly, Border Patrol. A lot of these folks are teaming up with the FDA to go after some of these illicit markets, which I find fascinating. They're, instead of fixing the problem, which would be authorize more products to actually be on the legal market, they're just putting a Band-Aid on a bullet hole where they're kind of now fixing their own mess without actually fixing it. So we've seen a couple of raids happen in various states where they're going after, again, illicit vape products. And they wouldn't be illicit if they would just authorize them. Again, they, I think, can prove that it is for the protection of public health to authorize these things, which is the requirement that the FDA has for authorizing. But we're just not seeing them be ideologically consistent here, which again is ironic when the head of HHS is a known pouch user. So we need to get get it together on the federal side. And I think that will also help get the states on board as well. Similar to what's happening in Canada, where different provinces have different regulations. It's the same thing in the US. We have federal policy that then is competing with state policy, which then is also competing with local policy. And so it's creating this patchwork of regulations that makes it really challenging for consumers to even know what's legal, and then also the manufacturers as to how they can even get their products out there and where. So we need some more consistency in the US. Cautiously optimistic, but I certainly won't be holding my breath.
I mean, cautiously optimistic is a good term to use, I guess, and generally in THR discussions. But it's good that we are optimistic and we can see some of the steps that are taken. And I want to get back to Sabine about the report that you talked about, because I think we need to talk a little bit more about that, because it's not very often that the health authorities or through their health authorities recognize harm reduction products officially like that. And I didn't expect it. First, when I read the report, I was pretty surprised, to be honest. And knowing how health authorities in Canada treat nicotine generally, it was surprising to me. So maybe you could discuss how significant is that acknowledgement. Do you think, I know you talked a little bit about that, but do you think it could realistically influence future policy discussions in Canada?
I think if we push for that influence, it will. I don't think that it's going to be proactive, unfortunately, by any politicians. It's not popular to talk about, right? It's not something that, it's more popular to say, we're doing something, we're putting pouches behind, you don't have to get a prescription, but it's still there. You still have to go out of your way to a pharmacy and make sure and see they even have it. So making it more inconvenient is actually the easy thing to do. And as we know, politicians like to do the easy wins. They're not focusing on trying to actually do something significant for your health, unfortunately, a lot of the time. So these easy wins are a problem. But this kind of report allows us to make our argument a lot more clearly. We have all this evidence already. We have a lot of data on this. But when it's coming straight from the government, it makes it a little bit different. It makes it a little bit easier for us to say things like, okay, well, if you said this, why can't we have a sign saying vaping is better for your health than smoking in a convenience store? We have really good rates of convenience stores and gas stations abiding by the laws. They have, it's always in the 90%. They go in and they investigate to see if they're doing the right thing, they're following the laws. They always are. So we can trust them to do that and make sure they're not selling it to children, make sure they're not doing the wrong thing. So why can't we trust them to put up a sign like that to help people realize the difference? Maybe we can start advocating more for a sliding scale in taxation. This is something that's really easy for us to start talking about now. A lot easier for us to talk about when we have this report in our hand saying, look, you said this is better for people. If you want to actually make significant change in an individual's health, then maybe we should encourage them to buy these things that your data is showing is helping by making it a little cheaper for them to do, instead of having to go to the black market or whatever else they have to do. Let's get a legal vape in their hand that has less taxation on it, even though you're treating it like a cigarette. It isn't, and your own data shows it. So why wouldn't you do something like that? So I think in terms of having that policy conversation, this report is really helpful.
Yeah, I mean, you've mentioned it very correctly that youth uptake is usually the reason why policymakers have a very hostile approach towards less harmful nicotine products. And while it is a very important issue to regulate it so that young kids these products are not for kids, right? But when we talk about adults, they're completely neglected, and their journey of smoking cessation is completely neglected, sadly. But that's why we exist. We fight that, and let's hope that we can push back and successfully. We're slowly moving to the last part and the wrap up of our podcast episode today. So just to zoom out a little bit, because we have listeners from all around the world, and you focused on several countries right now, but maybe generally, as a wrap up message, you could tell us what makes you and keeps you optimistic in this debate, not only in the USA or Canada or Mexico, not so optimistic there, but still, what makes you generally optimistic in this debate? Maybe we could start with Liz.
Yeah, I think, the results from Sweden to me is, I will beat that drum all day long. I regularly tell our policymakers in the US about the success in Sweden. I think, we really need to embrace smart evidence-based policies. And like we've mentioned, prohibition doesn't work. Of course, we need to protect the kids and make sure they're not getting access to these products, but not to the detriment of adult consumers who will benefit. The more we overregulate, the more the illicit market is emboldened. And spoiler alert, it's a lot easier for youth to get access to these products on the illicit market. So if we actually have a smart regulated market where we keep taxes low, keep flavors involved in the conversation and available for consumers, and have as many choices as possible for, again, these less harmful nicotine alternatives, we hopefully and ideally will see more countries become like Sweden, who, of course, I know World Vapers Alliance has done great work here on what Sweden has been doing, but they have, halved their cancer incidents. They have become the first smoke-free country. The results out of Sweden are just incredible. And I think it's something that every other country should look to and replicate if they're serious about reducing smoking rates and protecting public health. So good job, Sweden. Hopefully everyone else can be like you. And we will keep that message going for sure. So that keeps me optimistic.
I think for me, the optimism comes from individuals themselves. As the side of the report that we aren't talking about enough is that people are making choices for themselves to stop smoking and start vaping. The number isn't happening because the government did anything special. It's because people are making the decision to do this. So it makes me really happy that they're getting that message somehow from us, from other organizations, just from talking to their friends and family, hopefully, that they have to make that transition. And in terms of youth, I think it's important that we have that regulated market, like Liz said, so that youth aren't accessing it if they're not already smoking. We don't want them to start vaping or smoking or whatever. We want them to live their healthiest lives. But for people who are smoking, I think it's really important that youth have their parents alive as well. It's nice to have your mom and your dad around for as long as possible. And the way that we do that is for individuals to make the choice to switch to these tobacco alternatives so that they can live better lives. And I'm seeing that, and that makes me happy.
Yeah, I mean, if policymakers around the world were less ideology driven and could take a look at the evidence, it would be so obvious that they don't even need to come up with a very complex program for smokers to help them quit smoking. It's just solely giving them a choice. And as you mentioned, Sabine, people are just making those choices. They know what's better for them. So definitely there is a lot of challenging environment around less harmful nicotine alternatives, but let's stay optimistic. I think there are positive developments as well, and as much as they want, at some point they cannot avoid what's scientific evidence anymore, and I hope that will be true one day. Thank you both so much for joining today. It's always refreshing to bring evidence and insight, so it's been a really interesting podcast for me to listen to you. So thanks, and obviously thanks to our listeners as well. Stay tuned. We'll definitely have other episodes as well, and we'll keep updating you about what's going on around vaping and other less risky nicotine alternatives. Vape on, and thank you.